My dad shattered my jaw for talking back. Mom laughed. That's what happens when you're useless. Dad sneered. Maybe now you'll learn to keep your filthy mouth shut. I just grinned. They had no clue what was about to hit them. When people look at a family from the outside, they always assume there's a line. Parents protect, kids trust, home is safe. My house was the opposite. It looked normal enough. A two-story place in the suburbs, trimmed lawn, my mom always bragging about how spotless she kept the kitchen. But behind the front door, it was a different world. My dad had this presence. You didn't breathe wrong around him. He didn't need to raise his voice to make you tense. The air got heavy when he walked into a room. If you said the wrong thing, even something as simple as, "I'm not hungry," you could feel the storm building in his jaw. And my mom? You'd expect her to be a shield. She wasn't. She was the echo. He'd bark, she'd laugh. He'd strike, she'd justify it. That's what happens when you don't listen. That line still echoes in my skull louder than any slap. Growing up like that twists you. Part of you normalizes it. You tell yourself everyone's dad gets mad, everyone's mom shrugs it off. And part of you knows it's rotten, but you're too small to change anything. I learned early how to read his footsteps, how to keep my face blank, how to survive another day. By the time I turned 18, I thought I was immune. That's the lie I told myself. Like, sure, my dad could scream, my mom could sneer, but I wasn't a kid anymore. I could handle it. Only, when you live with people who thrive on breaking you, handling it doesn't exist. They don't stop when you grow up. If anything, they double down, because watching you flinch makes them feel like nothing's changed. I still remember the night everything shifted. We'd just finished dinner. Pasta, overcooked like always because mom thought crunchy noodles meant you were poor. Dad asked me about a job application. I said I hadn't heard back yet. That was enough. He didn't like my tone. My tone. That's all it took for the fist to connect, for my jaw to crack like dry wood. My mom didn't rush to call an ambulance. She laughed, said maybe I'd learn to shut my useless mouth. I couldn't even close my teeth together properly. My lips split, blood dripping onto the table. My dad smirked like he'd just fixed something. And through the pounding pain, I did the one thing that confused him. I grinned. A crooked, bloody grin. Because for the first time, I wasn't just enduring. I was planning. I had no idea just how far this plan would take me, or how much darker it would get before any light showed up. The pain was unreal, like my whole skull had been split open from the inside. I remember holding my jaw, half expecting my hand to sink into bone fragments. The taste of blood filled my mouth, metallic and hot, and I could barely breathe without feeling knives stab along the crack. Dad didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, chewing his food like nothing happened, like breaking me was just part of his evening routine. Mom grabbed her wine glass, swirling it as if this was some kind of show. She smirked, the kind of smirk that tells you she enjoyed it. And she said, "Well, maybe now you'll think before you spit nonsense." That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not in the broken sense. I'd been broken plenty of times before. No, this was different. This was a spark. I looked at them, Dad proud of himself, Mom entertained, and I realized they expected silence. They expected me to shrink, to cry, to beg for mercy. But I didn't. I grinned through the pain, my teeth smeared red. My dad's eyes narrowed. For the first time in years, he looked unsettled. Just a flicker, but I saw it. And I knew right then. Fear could go both ways. That night, lying in my room with my jaw swollen and my pillow stained crimson, I thought about every time I had taken their blows and insults. Every time I convinced myself it was easier to keep my head down. Every time I wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe I was useless, worthless. But here's the thing. You can only corner someone for so long before they stop running and start biting back. I sat there in the dark, holding an ice pack against my face, and started making calculations. Not daydreams of payback, not vague fantasies. Real plans. My phone sat on the nightstand, its cracked screen lighting up with missed notifications. I stared at the tiny camera lens near the top, and a thought crept in. What if I started recording? Because evidence doesn't laugh. Evidence doesn't tell you you're imagining things. Evidence is cold, undeniable. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. They thrived because no one ever believed me. Teachers brushed off my excuses. Doctors nodded politely when Mom explained away my bruises. Relatives ignored the tension in the air at family gatherings. No one ever saw what I saw, so I decided I'd show them. The next morning, I woke up to Dad barking orders and Mom banging pans in the kitchen like nothing had happened. My jaw ached with every movement, but I kept my mouth shut. Outwardly, I played the role, the quiet son, the obedient shadow. But inside, I was already moving pieces on a board they didn't even know existed. When Dad sneered, "Look who finally learned his place," I just lowered my eyes, nodding. But my mind was miles ahead, because what he didn't know was that every word, every threat, every strike from this point forward wouldn't just disappear into memory. I'd make sure it lived forever. I acted like I was broken, but the truth? That was just the beginning. I didn't sleep much after that night. My jaw throbbed every time I shifted on the pillow, and each pulse reminded me. This wasn't just another fight I could brush off. It was proof. Proof that I needed something stronger than words, stronger than bruises fading too fast to convince anyone. So the next day, when Dad stormed out for work and Mom disappeared on one of her errand runs, I sat in the silence of the kitchen and pulled out my phone. It wasn't much, an old model with a half-dead battery, but it had one thing I needed: a camera. I tested the record function, set it on the counter, and let it run while I clattered dishes around. Later, when I played it back, the audio was crystal clear. My heart pounded. If I could capture them in one of their usual rages, I'd finally have something no one could ignore. At first, it felt almost impossible. The second I started recording, they acted normal. Dad's voice low, Mom's tone soft, like they'd rehearsed for an audience that wasn't there. I thought maybe I was going crazy, imagining the whole thing. That's the danger of abuse. You start doubting your own reality. But then came dinner. It was something as small as me forgetting to set out the bread. Dad's eyes locked on me like I'd just spit in his plate. "Are you completely useless, or do you practice at it?" he snapped. My mom chuckled, chiming in with, "Don't push him too hard. He might break his other bone this time." I didn't say a word. I just let the phone run, hidden under the edge of a folded napkin. And when Dad's fist slammed the table so hard the glasses rattled, when his voice thundered that I was a disgrace, I caught every second of it. Clear audio, sharp enough to feel the spit fly. Later, alone in my room, I replayed it. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from something sharper: validation. It was real. It wasn't just me. And hearing their cruelty echo back through the tiny speaker made me realize just how much I'd been minimizing it all these years. Still, part of me hesitated. What if no one cared? What if, like always, they smiled politely and said, "Families fight"? The thought made my stomach twist. But the other part of me, the part that smiled through a shattered jaw, knew better. I wasn't imagining things. I had proof. That night, I tucked the phone into my drawer, careful not to arouse suspicion. I kept my expression blank at breakfast, even when Dad mocked the way I chewed slower because of my jaw. Mom laughed at his joke, sipping her coffee like she was in on the best secret in the world. But I felt different now. There was a barrier between us. They thought they were untouchable, that their cruelty lived and died inside these walls. But I knew better. Every cruel word, every violent snap, it wasn't just hanging in the air anymore. It was captured, stored, waiting. And that's when I found something that confirmed my worst fears. Buried in my phone's gallery, I stumbled across a video I didn't even remember hitting record on, and what it captured made my blood run cold. I don't even remember hitting record that evening. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe I brushed against the screen without noticing. But there it was, a 30-minute clip buried between my usual recordings. I almost deleted it without checking. Something told me to watch. The video started in the living room. I must have set my phone on the armrest when I left to grab something, because the frame was tilted, pointed just enough to catch the reflection in the darkened window. At first, it was nothing, just the faint hum of the TV, the clink of dishes. But then Dad's voice cut in, sharp and low. "You think he'll keep quiet?" My blood froze. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to Mom. Her laugh followed, cold and dry. "Of course he will. He's too scared to do anything. Always has been." The air in my room thickened as I replayed it. They were talking about me like I wasn't even a person, just a problem to manage. Dad's voice dropped lower. "If he ever tries to run his mouth outside this house, I'll shut it for good. Permanently." The way he said permanently, my stomach lurched. Mom didn't protest. She didn't gasp in shock. She didn't even flinch. She just said, "Make sure you don't leave marks where people can see." I paused the video, staring at the frozen reflection of their bodies hunched together on the couch. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. It wasn't just violence. It wasn't just discipline. This was conspiracy, agreement. My own parents plotting like criminals in their safe little kingdom. For a few minutes I just sat there, numb. Part of me wanted to throw up. Another part wanted to smash the phone against the wall. But the third part, the one that had been growing since the night of the broken jaw, felt sharper than ever. Cold. Focused. Because now I had them. Not just yelling. Not just insults. Their own words, recorded crystal clear, admitting exactly what they were doing. And worse, promising more. I listened again, this time catching details I missed the first round. The way Mom lowered her voice when she mentioned people at church asking questions. The way Dad muttered something about the neighbors already being too nosy. They knew eyes were on them, and yet they still thought they were untouchable. That realization twisted something in me. All my life, I thought maybe I was exaggerating. Maybe the pain didn't count if no one else noticed. Maybe I was weak. But hearing them, casually, almost gleefully confirming it, it shattered that illusion. I wasn't weak. They were monsters. My jaw throbbed, as if to punctuate the thought. I touched the swollen bone, remembering Dad's sneer, Mom's smirk. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I smiled for real. Not the broken, bloody grin at the dinner table. Not the fake mask I wore to keep them off my back. A genuine, dangerous smile. Because suddenly, survival didn't feel like enough anymore. I backed up every file on a hidden drive. I downloaded apps to encrypt storage. I set passwords they couldn't guess. Each click felt like stacking bricks into a wall, one they'd never climb. And while I worked, I imagined their faces when they realized the control they'd gripped for decades was slipping. The next morning, Dad barked at me for taking too long in the bathroom. Mom chimed in with her usual laugh. I kept my face blank, chewing carefully on the softer side of my jaw. But inside, I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Because when Dad spat, "What are you grinning at?" I knew something he didn't. Every insult, every threat, every laugh at my expense wasn't disappearing into thin air anymore. It was being preserved. And sooner or later, that preservation was going to burn them. I wasn't ready for what I was about to discover next. Because this went deeper than just bruises and words. It was a pattern older than me, and I was about to stumble straight into it. The recording looped in my head for days. Their voices, so casual about destroying me, so certain they'd never be caught. It was fuel. But then something happened that pulled the ground right out from under me. One afternoon, while taking the trash out, I heard the neighbor's door creak open. Mrs. Alvarez, the older woman next door, stood there holding a bag of recyclables. She froze when she saw me, her eyes flicking to the swelling still faintly visible on my jaw. For once, she didn't look away. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. I forced a smile, the automatic mask I always wore. "Yeah, I just fell." She didn't buy it. Her face tightened, and she muttered, almost to herself, "Just like your uncle." Then she shook her head and disappeared back inside. The words lodged in my brain like splinters. Just like your uncle. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I dug through the old boxes in the basement, dusty cartons stacked with photo albums, brittle paperwork, forgotten junk. Hours passed until I found a folder with my uncle's name on it. Hospital forms, police reports, notes scribbled in the margins. I read until my eyes blurred. My uncle, Dad's younger brother, had been hospitalized multiple times in his 20s. Accidental falls, workplace injuries, fights with strangers. But buried in the notes was a pattern. Neighbors reporting yelling, family members describing bruises, whispers of abuse that went nowhere. It wasn't random. It was generational. I sat there on the cold basement floor, the papers spread out like puzzle pieces. My father wasn't just violent. He was raised in it. My mother wasn't just complicit. She knew the history and still chose to laugh. For a long time, I stared at the files, trying to reconcile it. Part of me wanted to pity him, to think maybe he couldn't help it. But pity doesn't reset broken bones. Pity doesn't erase scars. He had a choice every single day. And every single day, he chose fists and cruelty. And Mom, she could have broken the cycle. She could have protected me. Instead, she doubled down, ensuring it survived another generation. By the time I crawled back upstairs, my hands were trembling. Not from fear, but from the sheer weight of knowing it was worse than I thought. This wasn't just my battle. It was a legacy of destruction. The next morning at breakfast, Dad grunted about bills, Mom joked about how useless kids never leave home. I stared at them across the table, and something shifted in my chest. They weren't parents. They were carriers of a sickness, and I was done being the host. I didn't say anything, not yet. I just let the silence stretch until Dad slammed his fist against the table. My jaw ached in memory, but my heart didn't flinch this time. Because now I knew this wasn't going to end on its own. And if I didn't take it further, if I didn't expose them fully, I'd be the next forgotten file in a dusty box. It wasn't just worse than I thought. It was much, much deeper. And I knew then that the only way forward was to fight back, no matter what it cost me. Sleep became a war zone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes: Dad's fist, Mom's smirk, my uncle's bruised hospital photos. My brain spun in loops. Run away, disappear, never look back. That was one path. If I packed a bag and vanished, maybe I could carve out a quiet life somewhere they couldn't touch me. But the thought made me sick. Because if I ran, they'd keep going. They'd find new ways to twist the story, to laugh at me, to hurt whoever else was unlucky enough to orbit their world. People like Mrs. Alvarez had already seen it before, and nothing had changed. The other path was darker, heavier. Fight. Not fists, not screaming. I'd lose that battle 1,000 times. But with proof. With the law. With eyes on them so wide and so many that not even their smugness could survive it. Still, the doubt gnawed at me. What if the police shrugged it off again? What if a judge called it family discipline? I imagined standing there in court, my parents smiling sweetly, insisting I was troubled. I could already hear the words. Overreacting, ungrateful, liar. I spent nights pacing my room, scribbling plans in notebooks, then ripping them out in frustration. Revenge whispered sweetly, do to them what they'd done to me. But then I'd look at my reflection, at the swelling still visible along my jawline, and I knew. If I became them, I'd lose everything. No, I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. Real, undeniable justice. So I started narrowing the plan. Recordings, documentation, allies. Evidence they couldn't twist. Evidence so strong it would crush every smug laugh out of their mouths. One morning, staring into the bathroom mirror, I whispered to myself, no more running. My voice cracked, but it didn't matter. For the first time, the decision was clear. I spent sleepless nights building the plan, and finally, I knew exactly what I had to do. I knew recordings weren't enough. Words could be twisted, videos could be dismissed as taken out of context. What I needed was something official: paperwork, signatures, undeniable documentation. So the next morning, jaw aching with every step, I walked into the emergency room. The fluorescent lights made me dizzy, but I forced myself to the counter. The nurse's eyes lingered on the swelling along my face. She didn't press, just handed me a clipboard. A few minutes later, a doctor tilted my chin, his gloved hands cool against my skin. Fracture, he muttered, almost to himself. He sent me for x-rays. When the results came back, they showed a clean crack along the lower jaw. That single word, fracture, felt like a weapon in my pocket. He noted everything in the report, snapped photos for the record, even wrote, injury consistent with assault, in the comments. For the first time, someone outside the house had called it what it was. Walking out with that folder of paperwork, I felt a tremor of power I hadn't known in years. Next step, the police station. My hands shook as I clutched the file, half expecting them to laugh me out the door. At the front desk, a young officer skimmed the papers, raised an eyebrow, and shrugged. Family arguments get heated. You sure you want to file this? The old fear surged back. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe they'd dismiss me like everyone else. But then another voice cut in. A woman in plain clothes, dark hair pulled into a messy bun. She introduced herself as Detective Morales. Her tone was steady, no nonsense. She asked me to start from the beginning. I laid out the medical report, the photos, the recordings I'd backed up on a flash drive. She didn't look away. She didn't chuckle. She leaned in closer, her expression hardening with every detail. This is serious, she said finally. We're opening a case. But you need to understand, this won't be easy. They'll lie. They'll play the victim. They'll try to turn it back on you. We'll need every piece of evidence you can provide. Witnesses, too, if possible. I slid the drive across the desk. She plugged it in, played a short clip, and her jaw tightened at my dad's voice booming through the tiny speakers. She handed me her card. Don't engage them. Don't respond to threats. If things escalate, call me directly. Her words stuck with me. Don't engage them. Like she knew exactly how easily they could bait me back into silence. Walking out of the station, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Validation. It wasn't over, not by a mile, but someone believed me. Someone outside that house knew the truth. Still, as I headed home with the folder tucked under my arm, dread pressed heavy on my chest. My parents didn't know yet. They thought their control was intact. And when they found out I'd gone to the police, I thought the worst was behind me. I couldn't have been more wrong. When I walked back through the front door, I braced myself for the storm. I expected yelling, fists, maybe worse. But instead, silence. My dad was sitting on the couch, scrolling his phone. My mom was in the kitchen humming to herself, the smell of roast chicken filling the air. It was disorienting. No sneers, no threats. Just a weird domestic calm. Over dinner, Dad even asked, almost politely, "How's your jaw?" His tone was clipped, but not venomous. Mom added, "We were maybe too harsh. You know your father just wants the best for you." I stared at them, waiting for the trap to spring. But it never did. For the next 2 days, they acted like model parents. No raised voices, no insults, not even a shove when I left dishes in the sink. Mom offered me tea before bed. Dad tossed me a good night, like we were some sitcom family. For a second, I almost believed it. The tension in my shoulders eased. My stomach stopped knotting every time I heard footsteps in the hallway. Part of me wanted desperately to cling to it, this fantasy of normalcy. Maybe going to the police had scared them. Maybe they'd finally realized they'd gone too far. But then I caught the look. It was subtle, Dad glancing at Mom when he thought I wasn't watching. A smirk playing at the corner of her lips when I turned my back. It wasn't peace. It was calculation. I should have known better. People like them don't change in 2 days. The calm didn't last long. And what came next made the broken jaw feel like the least of my problems. It was the 3rd day of their sudden kindness when the mask cracked. I'd left my backpack on my bed while I showered. Inside, tucked deep in a side pocket, was the flash drive I used to store backups of the recordings. I came out of the bathroom, towel over my shoulder, and the silence in the house was wrong. Too sharp. My bedroom door was half open. Dad stood inside, my bag unzipped, the flash drive pinched between his fingers. Mom was beside him, smiling like a cat that finally cornered a mouse. My stomach dropped. "What's this?" Dad asked, voice deceptively calm. He twirled the drive once, then set it on the desk with a soft click that felt louder than a gunshot. "You been spying on us?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. The walls closed in. Mom stepped closer, her voice syrupy sweet. "We knew you'd try something. Always sneaky, always dramatic. Do you really think anyone cares about your little recordings? Families fight. That's all they'll hear." Dad's face darkened. He slammed his hand against the wall, inches from my head. The plaster cracked. "You think you can humiliate us? You think you can ruin me? You'll regret it." For a second, I thought he'd break the other side of my jaw. My pulse thundered in my ears. But instead, he grabbed the flash drive and snapped it clean in half, plastic shards scattering on the carpet. Mom laughed, clapping like it was a performance. "Problem solved," she said. But they didn't know I was smarter than that. The drive they destroyed was a decoy, a blank stick I'd kept on purpose. The real files were hidden in the cloud, encrypted and safe. Still, watching them crush that piece of plastic lit something inside me. Fear, yes, but also fury. I clenched my fists. For once, I didn't shrink. I looked my father dead in the eyes, jaw still aching, and said, "You should have killed me when you had the chance." The words froze him. His hand twitched, his eyes wide for a split second. Mom's smile faltered. Then his rage returned full force. He lunged, grabbing my shirt, shoving me against the wall so hard the picture frames rattled. "You think you're strong now," he hissed. "You're nothing. Without us, you'd starve in a week." I forced a grin, though fear clawed at my insides. "Then maybe you should be afraid of nothing." That night, I barricaded my door with a chair. Every creak in the hallway made my skin prickle. I barely slept, every second replaying the look on his face, the fear, however fleeting, when I pushed back. The next morning, Dad was gone before I woke. Mom made pancakes, humming like nothing happened. She slid a plate in front of me and said, almost cheerfully, "Eat. You'll need the energy." The sweetness in her tone was worse than her cruelty. I didn't touch the food. Instead, I went straight to the police station. Detective Morales met me in her office, eyes narrowing when she saw the bruise forming on my collarbone. I told her everything. The confrontation, the flash drive, the threats. Good, she said, voice steady. Now we escalate. She explained restraining orders, warrants, protective measures. The investigation was no longer just preliminary. It was moving forward fast. Still, walking home that night felt like moving through a minefield. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't peace. It was a storm gathering strength, waiting to break. What happened next made me question everything I thought I knew, because the fight wasn't just about me anymore. It was about survival. The house no longer felt like a house. It was a cage, and every sound was a threat. I slept with one eye open, chair jammed under the doorknob, phone clutched in my hand like a weapon. Every creak in the hallway sent adrenaline flooding my veins. One night, I woke to the smell of smoke. My heart stopped. I thought they'd set the place on fire. I bolted upright, only to find Dad in the living room, cigarette in hand, glaring at me through the haze. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The message was clear: you're never safe. The investigation dragged on, but my parents grew bolder. They whispered loud enough for me to hear. He'll drop it. He's too weak. No one believes kids like him. The walls of my room felt smaller every day. And then came the letter. I opened the mailbox one afternoon and found a notice from the police department. The wording made my stomach twist. Insufficient evidence to proceed at this time. It wasn't the end of the case, but it read like a dismissal, like a door slamming shut. I remember standing there on the porch, the paper trembling in my hand. My parents watching me from the window, smirking. They knew. They knew I'd hit a wall. That night, I crumbled. For the first time since the broken jaw, I felt the fight drain out of me. I sat on the floor of my room, lights off, and let the tears come. Silent, bitter, choking sobs. Every bruise, every insult, every time I told myself it would matter, suddenly it all felt pointless. Maybe they were right. Maybe no one cared. Maybe I was just screaming into a void, begging for justice that never came. I thought about running, about grabbing a backpack, disappearing, starting fresh somewhere no one knew me. But even that felt hollow, because no matter where I went, I'd still carry their voices in my head. That was the lowest point. Sitting there in the dark, broken, convinced I'd lost. And then a knock at my door. It wasn't them. It was Mrs. Alvarez, the neighbor. She slipped inside quietly, holding an envelope. I heard yelling again last night, she whispered. You're not crazy. I've been keeping a log. Dates, times, even recordings from my window. I froze. My breath caught. Someone else had seen. Someone else believed. She pressed the envelope into my hands. Don't give up. People like them, they count on silence. When she left, I sat there staring at the stack of papers she'd given me. Logs, notes, audio files. My chest tightened, not from fear this time, but from something new. Hope. That's when I realized what I had to do to end this once and for all. The envelope from Mrs. Alvarez was the match. I didn't waste a second. I organized her notes with my own files, the medical reports, and every recording I'd hidden in the cloud. This time, when I walked into Detective Morales' office, I wasn't just another kid with a story, I was armed with a case. She flipped through the logs, brows knitting tighter with every page. Then she plugged in the neighbor's audio, my father's roar echoing through the night, my mother's sharp laughter. Morales leaned back, tapping her pen against the desk. This, she said, is enough. We'll take it to a judge. 2 weeks later, I sat in a courtroom, palms sweating, heart pounding. My parents entered in pressed clothes, looking almost saintly. Dad's jaw was tight. Mom's eyes glistened with fake tears. They glanced around the room, charming smiles plastered on, like they were the victims here. For a moment, I almost panicked. What if the judge bought it? What if all my proof still wasn't enough? But then Morales nodded at me from the witness bench, and I remembered the neighbor's words. Don't give up. The prosecution played the first recording, my father's voice, venom dripping, threatening to shut me up permanently. The courtroom went still. Mom's laughter followed, cold and unmistakable. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Then came the medical report, the x-rays of my jaw. The judge's expression shifted, tightening around the edges. Finally, they played the video I'd almost deleted, the one where they talked about keeping marks hidden, about silencing me. My parents' faces drained of color. Dad's mask cracked, just for a second, when he realized there was no talking his way out. Their attorney tried. Oh, he tried. He claimed it was discipline, that the audio was taken out of context. But every argument collapsed under the weight of the evidence. The neighbor testified, voice steady, describing nights of screaming and crashes through the walls. She handed over her logbook, each page a nail in their coffin. When it was my turn to speak, my voice shook at first. But then I saw them, my parents, who had spent years convincing me I was worthless, now squirming under the weight of truth, and the fear dissolved. I used to think maybe I was crazy, I told the court. Maybe I deserved it. But this, I lifted the stack of reports, proves I wasn't imagining anything. They broke me because they could, and if I hadn't fought back, they'd still be doing it. The room was silent. The judge leaned forward, her voice firm. I've heard enough. The ruling was swift. Protective orders granted, criminal charges filed, custody revoked from any contact with me. My father was ordered into custody that very day, my mother facing charges as an accomplice. Watching the bailiff take my dad's wrists in cuffs was like watching a chain snap in two. He didn't smirk. He didn't sneer. He just stared at me, eyes blazing with a mix of rage and something I never thought I'd see, fear. And my mom. She tried to call out my name, her voice high, desperate, like suddenly she remembered how to play mother. I didn't look back. Walking out of that courtroom, sunlight hit my face like I hadn't felt in years. My jaw still ached, the scars were still there, but something deeper had shifted. For once, I wasn't carrying the weight alone. The truth had been spoken out loud, in a place where lies couldn't smother it. I had faced them on their battlefield, with their rules, and I won. But the trial was only the beginning. The real question was what came after, when the silence of the house was finally mine.